everybody, and welcome to the world's favorite youth baseball podcast, Clearing the Bases, featuring Coach Jimmy Filangieri. I'm David Friedman. I want to thank you for coming along on this ride with us. How are we doing today, Coach?
Doing good, Dave. A lot of things going on. Been very busy the last few weeks.
Yeah, wasn't fully expecting that, this being the normal kind of little bit of down season in our sport, but you had an exciting trip recently. For those that wouldn't know, Jimmy had gotten a personal invitation to join the ABCA Youth Baseball Summit, which was held out at the Kansas City Royals facility. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Jimmy?
It was pretty interesting, Dave. It all started back at the convention, the ABCA convention back in January, where I met up with Rob Haney, who was the chairman of the Youth and Travel Committee of the ABCA, and we talked a little bit, and he asked me if I was interested in attending this summit, and I said yes, and, here we are, 11 months later, flew into Kansas City, met a bunch of guys, about 20 of us were involved in this, and the Kansas City Royals were gracious enough to host this at their main offices, and what an experience.
Well, that sounds really cool. So you were actually at their main office. I assume that's at the stadium.
Yes, it was held at Kauffman Stadium. They had the Royals sent a coach bus to the hotel, picked us all up, drove us out to the stadium. We went in. We were in one of their conference rooms, and there were quite a few guys from the Kansas City Royals that actually attended and listened to what we had to say.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So, and now proud to announce that you are the new hitting coach for the Kansas City Royals.
Yeah, imagine that. Yeah, they had a couple of they had a special advisor to the general manager there. The Royals general manager actually spoke to us. They had their head scout there that was talking to us, and a couple of their executives that were there, and they spoke to us, but for the most part, they listened to what we were saying. And I thought that was pretty interesting because all of the problems that we're seeing in youth baseball, they're seeing at the major league level. And their take on the whole thing was, well, we need to help you to fix this down on a lower level so that we don't have to deal with it by the time it gets to us. It was pretty interesting.
Well, yeah, you figure just like all the coaches that we've spoken to, the junior college coaches and high school coaches, and they're all, we all have the same experience, essentially, that the kids are coming in at a lower starting point than what we're used to from years past. There's no way that can't translate all the way up through the next couple levels, the colleges and the D1s and the pros.
Yeah, and it was something that came to mind that I never really thought about. But if you're a high school, let's say you're a kid that gets drafted right out of high school and goes into pro ball, that's got to be, from what we're seeing, that's got to be culture shock to the guys that are at the professional level, to see a high school kid come in. And again, through our experience, we know that the high school players do not have the baseball IQ, the fundamentals down and all of that stuff. Like I said, it must be culture shock for them when they get a high schooler. A college kid a little bit different because, at the college level, they're probably getting some pretty intense training. But, it really woke me up.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. And now, so the group that was gathered here, so you're and as much as, you're as much of a self-depreciator as anybody, you're an well-established travel and high school coach. Is this the level of most of the attendees there?
Oh, they came from all different backgrounds. There were, high school coaches like myself. There were a couple of college coaches. There were some tournament directors. There were people that represented, how do I put this? They're like youth initiatives for major league teams. I know that there was one person there that worked with the LA Dodgers. And again, I'm not exactly sure what his capacity is, but the Royals had several people there that deal with their urban development and their, youth baseball development. Yeah, there was people from all different backgrounds. I was humbled. I guess that's the word to use.
So did it take you a little bit to kind of get warmed up to really start participating because of that? If you felt like maybe you didn't necessarily belong there, or were you able to hit the ground running from day one?
You hit the nail right
Because it
on.
was a relatively short period of time you were there. You got there Tuesday and you left on Thursday. So as much as it was crammed in for the period you were there, I'm sure you covered a ton of different things, but it really was a short period of time, not a lot of time to get up to speed.
Right. And yes, you hit the nail right on the head. I do not do well in groups. I'm one of those that I would rather not say much and listen more than I talk. So although I did have some things that I was able to contribute, but for the most part, I just sat and listened and I took notes, and, we'll see where it goes from there. But it takes me a while to loosen. I mean, I know we do this show and I talk my head off when we're on this show, but believe it or not, when I'm in a group, I'm very quiet.
Okay. So did they have to draw some out of you there, or did you warm up quickly enough?
I would say that I warmed up a bit more so when we broke off into groups. So what we did was we had like 20 guys in the room, and then we'd break off into like 3 subgroups of like 6 or 7 guys each. In those smaller groups, I'm a little bit better. Yes, I will talk more than I am in a bigger group. But yeah, it takes me a while to warm up. And, I would say that I probably warmed up mostly towards the end of it, where I would talk a little bit. So it's very hard for me. I am not, I guess you would say I'm not one of those guys that likes to put myself out there. I would rather hear what people say, and if I agree with you, yeah, I'm shaking my head yes, and if I disagree, I'm shaking my head no.
All right. And which was there more of?
Definitely the yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right.
I mean, these are a lot of smart baseball people that have a lot of good ideas. It's hard. We've talked about it a million times. We all know what the problem is, and everyone who sat in that room knows what the problems are. It's how do we fix them? How do we implement? Because that is very, very difficult.
Well, yeah, definitely. And so is there any major takeaway that you walked away with, like something that either you could see yourself implementing right away with your team, or, bringing back to the local league? Any one thing that stands out?
Well, I think that the whole idea when we left was that we need to have a governing body for youth baseball across all levels. Little league, recreational ball, travel baseball, everything. There needs to be some type of governing body. Now, we know that USA Baseball is the governing body, and we discussed this. We discussed how great USA Baseball's content is, but there's no bite to it. We need something with a little bit of bite. And I think that at least from my standpoint, I understand that bite as being we need to take baby steps, okay? And if we could create something that we'll call it like a seal of approval. If we can create a seal of approval that goes on travel teams or rec leagues and that type of thing, where there's going to be a certain level of coaching education, parent education that people are stamped with to say, yes, these people know what they're doing. That's kind of where I saw this thing going, is that what we're going to try and put together. Again, it's not going to be easy. You'll get maybe one team or one organization to get that seal. And then somebody said, well, if they have it, then I want it. And then so on, and hope that it grows. But there has to be something that has some bite to it.
All right. That seems like we've talked about it plenty of times before. So, it's a great idea. It's how to start getting it implemented.
Yes. Yeah. And let's face it, you and I both know that's what the problem is that we all know how to fix it. It's all through education. But how do you get people to want that education, and how do you deliver it to them?
All right, so you're back safe and sound and ready to tackle on another major announcement for you personally.
What would that be?
That congratulations are in order for Jimmy has accepted to become the head coach, the big cheese of a local school program here, where you are now the new varsity coach for Our Lady of Lourdes High School baseball program. So congratulations, Coach.
Thanks, Dave. You know, right before I left for the summit, it was the week before, I had interviewed for the position, and, they called me and offered me the job. And I got to tell you, I'm like a kid in a candy store. I have my own program now. It's going to be a challenge. I'm just digging into it, and man, it's a lot of work. It's not what I'm used to because, when I was in the travel world and when I was the JV coach, there was always somebody that was taking care of all of the administrative stuff. Now it's on me. So I'm up to the challenge. I'm looking forward to it. And look, it's part of the journey. Let's see where it goes.
That is very exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing about your exploits, and now you're in a position of actually hiring your own assistants. So any of our listeners out there, if you're in the area, this is in mid-Dutchess County, basically in the Poughkeepsie area. If you're within a reasonable commute and you have the skill set and the temperament and mentality that we talk about on the show all the time, feel free to reach out to Coach. Send them your resume, reach out and see, get a conversation going, because we're looking for a couple of assistant coaches.
Yeah, actually 3. Right now is all I have is the head JV coach that him and I spoke when I was hired, and he agreed to stay on, which is a good thing, and I appreciate Dave Vanderwater, great guy. I've known him for the last couple of years, and so it's really starting from nothing and moving forward. So I'm looking to put on 3 more coaches, hopefully 1 assistant varsity coach and 2 volunteer assistants. So, you and I have talked about it, and, that there's one of those spots that's open for you, Dave. So all you got to do is put your foot in it.
Yeah, well, I put my foot in it a little too often. So on the opposite side of that spectrum, I've stepped down as the assistant coach, the assistant JV coach at Beacon High School. The JV coach was stepping down. They asked me if it was something that I was interested in taking over. It took me less than a quarter of a second to say absolutely not. And kind of circling back to what you said about all the pressure being on you and everything. Yeah, I wasn't looking for any of that at this stage. Like you, not being a teacher is a huge disadvantage as a coach in terms of the schedule. And being in the private sector this year was tougher, a lot tougher than the previous 2 years. I wound up having to miss a number of practices and even a couple of games, which I had not done in the first 2 years that I'd done it. I felt like I wasn't able to commit to the boys. Had my head coach stayed on, I was even doubting whether I was going to be able to come back. I didn't know if I don't think it's fair to the kids or to the program if I can't be 100% in. And as much as other people have assured me the type of position I was in, because I was a volunteer myself. So it's something, but I don't look at it like, oh, I'm just a volunteer. If I'm a coach, I'm a coach. If I'm doing something, I'm doing it. So, 100% effort. Right. And, if I while I was there, I certainly was giving 100%, but I didn't know. think this year coming up for my business, I'm in the mortgage and banking business. It's going to be a tough year. I think my focus is going to be even spread out even more. So from a professional standpoint, so I just didn't think it was going to be a great idea. In terms of this, obviously, I'd love to come in and help. And when I can, I'd love to have that as an option, but I could not commit to any type of a quote unquote full-time coaching position. It just can't. I have no idea what my schedule is going to be like in the spring and over the winter. And I would not want to set up for failure.
Yeah, well, like we had discussed previously, I'd love to have you even in that capacity. And, look, it's up to you one way or the other. If you decide, hey, listen, I've got a few days, I'm going to come and help out, I'd love to have you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll be happy to jump in and help out where I can. I mean, I guess that's the upside is my schedule is going to be a lot more free because I'm not going to be committed to a program. So, it's something that just like the last time I stopped coaching, I was kind of happy. I had, I don't know, about an 8-year hiatus there where I was glad to not be coaching from some respects and having the headaches and all that goes with it. But I absolutely missed it. Missed being around the game as much, missed being around watching the development of the players. And I learned a lot in the last 3 years. I think I made a pretty good impact on quite a few players, and I'm definitely going to miss it. And yet, again, I'm kind of glad to be taking that step back because from a personal standpoint, it did, especially with the school program where you're there 6 days a week. I mean, it runs your life for 4 or 5 months, and it takes its toll. So, looking forward to it. And yet I'm sure I'm going to miss it like crazy. It's funny because I know you have a couple of players who I've had before, a couple of kids that switched schools. So part of me is really looking forward to going and seeing their development and where they're at now compared to where I saw them a year or two ago. So, that's very exciting to me. And, looking forward to hearing about your stories and seeing how you progress as a head coach in this environment.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. Also, like I had said, it's going to be a challenge. I'm up for it, and they hired me. I hit the ground running. I'm ready to go.
All right. Sounds awesome. So I know one of the things that you're going to be bringing in there is the mental aspect of the game, the mental performance. And as luck would have it, we have as our special guest this week, Mr. Jon Osborn. He is one of the leaders of RJ Performance Group. They can be reached at rjpg.net. And he's doing some fantastic things on the mental performance side of sports, and really looking forward to having a good conversation with him here today.
Yeah, it was funny. Jon reached out to me out of the blue. Never, typically I'll have some type of interaction with our guests prior to them coming on, but just got an email from him. He said, hey, Coach, what do you think about me coming on as a guest? I looked into, what his thoughts were and what his teachings are, especially his thing about the sport parents' do's and don'ts. And I said, hey, you know what? This is right up our alley. Let's get him on. And here we are.
Sounds good. Let's, without further ado, let's bring on Jon Osborn. So thanks for coming on with us, Jon. How you doing tonight?
Doing really good. Really happy to be here. This is going to be awesome. Love the podcast, and this is going to be a great one.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one. Anything that has to do with mental performance, I'm all in. So I was glad you reached out to us, and yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into it.
All right, so let's jump right in. As the head of RJ Performance Group, one of the big things that you've put out there is your sports parents' do's and don'ts, and that's what we really want to get into. Jimmy and I have covered this type of topic, not formally like this, but we certainly have covered it on a lot of the shows in little bits and pieces, but we haven't talked about specifics like this in quite a long time, so this should be really, really good for the parents and the players out there. So why don't you give us an idea? What was your idea in terms of coming up with this?
Yeah. Well, it's very kind of funny, as you are, running a business, we're really in the game of like trying to catch people's attention, and so TikTok has become such a really big thing for the athletes we work with. They're a big part of our audience. And so a few years ago, there was a TikTok trend about kind of like, hey, tell me based on your experience, what are the 5 things you'll never do, right? And so we just got to thinking about like, hey, what are some of the things that being a mental performance coach, what are the things that I'll, as a parent, once I'm a sports parent, what are the things I'll never do? And it just kind of transformed into, instead of just like telling parents, to stop, right? Let's also give them a couple of things like, hey, do this as well, right? And so this comes from, from a little bit of research, some anecdotal evidence, some of our experiences, talking with athletes, as well as some of our own personal experiences as well. But man, it's just blown up. Like this has been awesome to help parents, provide them with a little bit of information, help them really succeed. I'm not surprised at all that you guys have touched on being a sports parent so many times, because it is such a prevalent point of sports, and parents play such an important role. So I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, I mean it's right there in our faces constantly. Dealing with parents has become a big part of what we do as coaches, where if you go back to many years ago, like when I played sports, parents were like children. They were seen and not heard.
Right. Yeah, they dropped you off. Maybe they watched a little bit, and then afterwards it was like, hey, how'd it go? Right. They're involved now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is so good, right? We can take like the benefits and the positives of that, right? We love parent involvement, right? And so these do's and don'ts are really just to help parents who want to be involved, like be involved in the right way, to be as beneficial as possible to their athlete. I'm convinced that no parent is out here intentionally trying to ruin things for their kid. And please don't ruin that image for me in case they are. But a lot of times it's just, maybe it's negligence, it's ignorance, whatever it is. But doing some simple things can just absolutely change the direction and the course of a young athlete's life.
Oh, absolutely. So why don't we jump right in and just looking at the chart here, and what we'll do is we'll have to figure out a way we'll give your contact information at the end so people can go out and find you, but we'll have to see if there's a way when we post on our social medias, a link to the chart, and so people can really see what it's all about. Obviously, we're not going to just sit here and read it off to people, but let's jump in and get to one of the ones that I liked. Emphasize the power of yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Right. Well, I think parents are blessed with like such perspective. Like if you talk about one of the biggest differences between a youth athlete and adult athlete, it's just simply years here on earth. And I think sometimes parents forget that they have that great ability. One of the great like powers I think that the parents have is to be able to like frame things and put things in perspective for their kid. Right? Like athletes, we live so in the moment, and everything seems so big and so weighty, right? Every loss is the absolute worst. Every win's the championship, right? We live in these extremes. And so I think one of the things that parents can do so well is just offering like a little bit of perspective and emphasizing, in those difficult times that their child is a work in progress, right? That we don't expect a fourth grader to be the perfect pitcher or be the perfect player in any sport, right? But that they are a work in progress, that they're getting there, right? And that those things that the athlete cares so much about is still possible, but they just we're maybe not there yet. And with a little bit of work, we can get there, right? But I know that from my own experience, but also just so many youth athletes that I work with, that they just put so much pressure to be good right now. And I think the parents have such a blessing of perspective where they can offer that, and that they're, you're not there yet. You're not a champion yet. You're not a starter yet. You're not coach's favorite player yet. You're not an A student yet, whatever it might be, just helping them realize that there's a lot of power in that. Because if I'm not something yet, man, that's going to drive me. And I realize that it's possible with a little bit of extra hard work. And so, those things they can't figure out, it's like, hey, we can't figure that out quite yet. Right. And so just emphasizing that, and, even maybe just simply adding that word into some of the things they maybe hear their athlete say, can just become really powerful.
Sure, if a parent can make a player understand that the idea is to get 1% better every day, and that's
Right.
a very small step. Again, to your point, it's yes, let's get 1% better because you're not there yet.
Hmm. Right. And
You're,
I think part of that is also, part of that perspective is also that parent having the ability to offer, like when they see the 1% better, right? Like as the person trying to improve, 1% better is so hard to see, right? We're talking just a little bit of growth right there. But from the outside, it may actually be like a little bit more noticeable than to the person who's experiencing it. So what a powerful opportunity for a parent to be like, hey, you were looking pretty fast today. You were looking pretty twitchy today out there, right? That you're noticing the ways that they are getting 1% better, right? And so you're not only are you emphasizing yet, right, that we're working towards something, an improvement, but you're also providing that feedback for them that they may not be getting themselves, that it's actually working. This process of improvement is actually paying dividends because mom and dad are actually seeing it.
right, but I also think to your point that something that parents do need to understand is that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Right.
It does take time, and there are small gains upon small gains that become big gains.
Right. Yeah. That's a really great point that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And my mind just kind of goes to like, why on earth would we want it to be a sprint? Like why on earth would we want to be peaking so young anyway? Right. Like I tell that to a lot of teams I'll work with, like after a big win, not a championship win, but maybe like a big regular season win. I say, don't let this be the best part of our season. Right. Like I know you're feeling the love, you're feeling good and love that. That's great. Right. But let's keep it in perspective and be like, it's great. There's more that we want to accomplish. Right. You might be a dynamite elementary school basketball player, and that's great. Good for you. But like, let's not let the highlight you share for the rest of your life culminate in fifth grade. Right. Let's understand this process and like, let's get better and better and better. So when we're telling these stories to our own kids, we got something to be able to tell them about, a little bit later on too.
Yeah, players develop at different rates. So this happens quite often where maybe a younger player, like you said, maybe fifth, sixth grade, may not be a very good player, but by the time he's a junior, senior in high school, the kid's fantastic player. When meanwhile,
Right.
the kids that were good at fifth, sixth grade maybe fell by the wayside and they're not as good anymore.
Right. Yeah. I think I saw a graphic recently that said nobody who's played in the Little League World Series has ended up making like the actual World Series. I might be misquoting that there. Right. But people peak at different times. So like I said, just parents can offer just such like a really, really great perspective and kind of helping those youth athletes kind of figure out those different challenges.
So let's move to, and this is one of my favorite ones. Okay, so you have something in there about the car ride home from the game. Talk about that a little bit because that's my favorite one.
Yeah, don't turn the car ride into a coffin. Yeah. One of the things I remember most about my playing days, right, and I think it's a shared experience many of us have, is finishing a game, getting in the car ride home, and then immediately we start discussing and start breaking down the action, right? Breaking it down with your dad, breaking it down with your mom, whoever, right? And initially that seems like a fine conversation, and I do want to put a caveat on that if the athlete's good with that, like we're okay, right? That's not like a hard and fast don't you ever do that type of thing. But one of the things we've noticed is that right after the game and during the game, there are so many emotions and thoughts, and an athlete's trying to figure out really kind of how they feel about how the action went. They're trying to figure out how they feel about the outcome, about their effort, about their execution, all those different things, right? And when they enter into that car ride, typically it turns into a coffin because they don't have anything to share yet. They're still processing the information. Whereas there's an adult in the car who has a little more advanced brain chemistry and brain structure, who can break things down, and they know how they feel about it because they haven't been playing, they've just been watching, and so they're ready to discuss, and so they start. And it typically turns into a coffin because it's just entirely one-sided, right? It's not like the things that our parents are saying are bad on that car ride home. But what happens is that it doesn't end up being a discussion or any learning occurring. What it ends up being is more like a venting session for the parent, which I get that parents sometimes need. So I always say, hey, parents, if you need to vent, here's my number, right? Give me a call and we'll talk for 5 to 7 minutes and then we'll start talking solutions. But your athlete is still just trying to figure out how they feel about it, right? And so one of the things that I tell my athletes all the time is remember your parents are invested, right? So you're the one in charge. You're the owner of your athletic career, but remember they're invested parties. So you get to decide when to talk and when to break down the game. But they absolutely get a voice, right? It's not like parents can't share what they think. No, they're invested parties. They're allowed to share what they think about how the game went. But the athlete is the owner of that. They're owner of their career, and they're the ones that get to decide when that typically happens. And it might be on the car ride home, like I said, if that's when they like to do it. It might be after dinner. It might be the next day, right? But there are things that need to be talked about. Right, there are things that need to be shared by all invested parties. So it's important that conversation happens. Like I said, typically if it happens in the car ride turns into a little bit of a coffin, and it's really one-sided.
Well, I just want to emphasize one of the things that you said because I love it, and I think it's a great thing to let parents know, where you said to have the parent call you. So if the parent could bite their tongue for a little while, okay, while they're in the car, and after they get home or whatever, pick up the phone, call a friend. You want to vent, you want to go through all of this stuff, do it with a friend. Don't do it to the player, because a lot of times it'll have an adverse effect.
Yeah, one of the solutions that I feel like I tried to offer parents falls on the other side on our do list, and this is one of the suggestions that I have. When you're biting your tongue, and it's hard because you got some powerful emotions in there, right? One of the suggestions I have is to give friend a call, give grandma a call, whatever. Put that phone on speaker, and boast about your child's effort that game. Right, there might be some things that we got to break down X's and O's Y's to improve, and that's for that later conversation, right? But what think about what a powerful example and reminder that would be in that child's life to maybe just suffered a tough loss, maybe they had a tough game themselves, right? And they're getting in the car expecting to maybe get an earful, and instead mom or dad calls grandma and is just like, man, you'll not believe how hard Jon worked today. Man, he was making the right reads. He made some incredible decisions today, right? So for that athlete to be able to hear you boasting about their attitude, boasting about their effort, boasting about their work ethic, their coachability, their resilience, meanwhile they're sitting down there, well, that really helps an athlete understand and process their emotions a little bit. It moves away from thinking all about the result and moves instead to thinking about some of those process items that matter so much, right? So parents, when you're out there and you're like, man, I just want to say what I got, right? I want to talk in the car ride. Let's do it. Let's talk in the car ride. But instead of talking to our athlete, let's give grandma a call on the phone. And I want you just to boast about the effort you saw from your kid that day, right? Because there will be a time to break down the film, the X's and O's, the execution, right? But right now, when that child is processing how they feel, let's remove how you feel from the equation, and instead, man, let that athlete hear you boast about their effort, boast about some of the ways they stuck to the process. Like I said, coachability is an awesome one. Resilience, attitude, body language, any of those that you boast about in front of them, that they know that that's something you really care about, and you care about it so much that you're telling other people about it.
Yeah. Now, another thing that you would mention that I want to emphasize is you talked about the process. Okay, so this is another thing that I believe that I think the more parents understand the process, the better off they're going to be. So we know that with younger players especially that, we start with process-based goals to get to our outcome-based goals, okay? So if parents understood that a process goal is, let's say, to get a sub 760, okay? That's a process goal that we're working towards that. If the player does that, again, like you said, boast about it. Even though, again, it goes back to saying that it's only a very small part of the whole performance, it's a win. It's a win.
Yeah. Absolutely. You think about, I wish parents thought a little bit more about those things that lead to success, right? Too oftentimes parents, and the issue with parents doing this is that athletes already overvalue success, right? I mean, that's the whole basis of this like ring culture that we see in pro sports, right? Is we're placing a tremendous amount of value on, were you successful and do you have the proof of your success, right? The number of athletes that are turning down really, really good Division III or Division II scholarships because they are chasing a Division I walk-on, right? Like, we are overvaluing success. And one of the reasons that happens is because they see that everywhere, and they even get that message, simply from their parents or from leaders or whoever it might be, right? So one of the things that we can like really do to help emphasize the process is simply by not overemphasizing success. A question I love to ask parents is like, hey, tell me, those outcome goals you were talking about, right? What do you want out of your career? Well, tell me, what are some of the things that lead to them, right? And then I want you to emphasize those things. You want your kid to be an all-state player. Okay, great. What leads to them being all-state?
Right.
Right. Well, let me tell you, their timeliness at practice, their work ethic at practice, how coachable they are. Those are things that absolutely lead to, and also things that you and your athlete can do every single day. Right. So if you understand what leads to success and you emphasize those items instead, it becomes a really powerful tool, and also really helps focus the attention of your youth athlete.
So yeah, the focus shouldn't be always about the end result. It's about the process. It's about getting there. It's about making kind of those baby steps of like, all right, you struck out, but you fouled off 3 pitches this time, or, whatever the case may be. We're talking about making some kind of progress instead of just focusing on, oh, you're 0 for 4, stinks. I don't know why I'm taking you out here, that kind of stuff.
Right.
One of the things I found interesting, and it's something maybe we might need a little bit longer format on, but so one of your dues is on validate emotions. Okay. And I want you to get into that, because on the surface, I could see that as a very dangerous thing. And as a coach of teenagers in the current environment, I find that to not always be a positive thing. Why don't you go ahead?
Right, absolutely. Yeah. What emotion? What emotions are we okay with? Right. Yeah. Right. No, that's a really, really powerful one. So one of the things that we learn from sports psychology is that our emotions, like what we feel, is out of our control. Right. I strike out, I'm going to feel frustrated. I'm going to be angry. Right. So that's out of our control, that we experience anger and frustration, that we experience emotion. Now, what is in our control there is kind of twofold with emotions. Number one, how we express that emotion. And number two, how long we express that emotion. Right. And so those are two things as we validate someone's emotions, that we're always seeking to help them learn how to control, learn how to respond to that emotion. Right. So when we validate emotions, it lets them know that like they're not wrong for feeling, which I think is really important, right? I remember losing a youth basketball game when I was 14, and I just like broke down in tears because I had wanted to win that one so bad. I worked my tail off. Like, I don't think I came out. I remember I hustled after every ball and we lost. And I remember just sitting on the sideline just like crying. And I heard someone like walk past being like, dude, it's just youth basketball. And are they right? Of course, it is just youth basketball, right? But in that moment, man, I felt dumb for losing, and I felt even dumber for crying about it, right? But like, I cared, right? And I would have just loved if someone said, hey, it's all right that you're caring about it, but what are you going to do? Right? That's where I love the kind of the second step of validating emotions is like, all right, so what are we going to do about it? Right? Yeah, I understand that you're angry. I understand that you're disappointed. So what are you going to do about it? Right? How are you going to express that frustration, and how long are you going to express that frustration for? Right? How's that going to manifest? And what we're trying to do in sports psychology, or when I'm working with athletes, is I'm trying to make that controlled response very deliberate and very on purpose. Say, okay, you're mad. What are you going to do on purpose? Right? And then we're going to try to shorten the amount of time that we express that. Right? It's okay. You're going to be angry, and you're going to be angry for 5 seconds. Right? You're going to be angry walking back to the dugout. And for that walk back to the dugout, you are going to curse and you're going to moan to yourself for those 8 seconds. And then the moment you hit the dugout, you're back into what's the best way I can help my team right now? How can I be the best teammate it is, right? So you're not wrong for being frustrated, but we're just trying to shorten the amount of time and be very in control with how we express those emotions.
Right, try and get you back on track.
Right, try and get you back on track. Because one of the things we've noticed is that if I don't validate or if I don't accept my emotions, then my future is skewed. Right, because I'm trying to be present. Meanwhile, there is this emotion that I haven't accepted or let go of or allowed to like kind of process as part of the stress cycle. Right, and so it's almost like my attention is divided between what I'm trying to do and like trying to keep a cat in a bag type of thing. Right, and instead we're like, hey, experience the emotion, accept it that it's part of your history right now. Right, you struck out. That's part of your history. Now, what are you going to do with the rest of your future? Right? Are you going to let that failure, let that mistake like sideline you and take you completely out of this? Or is that going to be part of your comeback story, whatever it might be, right? So we validate the emotions so they know that it's okay to feel things. And I also think that's just kind of important for the rest of their lives, right? Like the reason we all love sports and we still love sports talking as adults is because of the lessons that we still find ourselves like coming back to that we learned through sports. And I think validating our emotions is one of them that we can really make some gains, because man, you're going to experience all range of emotions the rest of your life. And if you can learn to like validate and accept them and also like control your response and control the length of your response, when the boss sends down a memo that completely, axes half of your department or cuts back on overtime, or the economy tanks and so does your 401k, right? Like all these setbacks that we're going to experience, the times when fight with your significant other, right? And there's intense emotions. We can learn in sport how to accept those and also like what we're going to do about it. Man, just such a powerful lesson for the rest of our lives.
The next thing that I'd like to get into, and Dave, I'm sure you're going to want to get into this also, is you talk to us a little bit about stats.
Yeah, stats tell us a lesson, right? I was listening to Theo Epstein the other day talk about sabermetrics and analytics, and how once analytics kind of hit the game, we swung away in the analytics direction. And it was like, we're only going to do what the analytics say. And now we're like swinging back into the human experience, right? Like, what do the analytics say? But plus, what does the character tell us? What do we learn about the person, right? And how important that is, that athletes are not just numbers. Right, that's something I really saw working with our professional soccer team, is how often, like, I get sports as a business, but how often players are talked about as numbers, right, and assets to be traded. And you hear that a lot in the sport business world, right, about assets. We've got a stockpile of draft picks or whatever. It's like, yeah, those are also people too, right? So I get that sports as a business. But when we place at the youth level, when we place like all the emphasis and all the value on the stats that they're getting, what that does is it centralizes into the only things they care about, right? And that there are many, many ways for a player to impact the game. And the truth is that we're not all first round draft picks. The truth is that many of us are, we're glue guys. Many of us are going to have to be, the come off the bench, make an impact in a limited role type of way, right? And so, and when we're on the best teams, like, we're going to need to do that to do what's best for the team. And so when we overvalue stats, well, at a young age, we're like, hey, those are the things that matter. That's what matters. That's what matters. And what becomes dangerous is when athlete doesn't get that, when they don't get the hits, when they have the error, when they don't get the strikeout, when they don't get the playing time, when they don't get the shot, whatever it is. Well, now it's like, well, why am I even here? Right? And that's where I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing such intense dropout rates of youth sports, is because not everybody can get the stat. Right. And so we can instead like emphasize some of the other ways for our athletes to impact the game. show them, how important some of these other stats, might be. They may not be the sexy ones. They may not be in the make the newspaper, right? But there are like lots of other stats that like really do matter a lot.
Yeah, it's something that we do talk about on here. A good friend of the show, Steve Springer, he talks about it all the time. Just very simply, batting average is one of the most misleading stats ever. You could hit 3 little flares, a little infield grounder, and you batted 1,000 for that day. Meanwhile, I'll take the guy who's ripping line drives that just happen to get caught, all day long, every day. So that in itself is important. I think it's also a matter of just that doesn't tell the picture. So that doesn't tell you anything about effort and attitude and desire and how much work you put in and all that
right.
stuff. It's just a number on a page.
Yeah, but so interesting, right? That I love that he says that the batting average isn't like really indicative, because you think about any any all-star lineup or any all-state team or all-region, whatever, it's name, first thing showing there is their batting average, right? And it's like, oh, that's not necessarily like indicative, right? And so I think that's where you get like a lot of athletes are placing their value on the stats that they get, right? And so we understand, that there are other ways to bring value to your team, right? And I like this piece because it's not like we're trying to get all like butterflies and rainbows and be like, hey, these stats don't matter, right? Because I'm still like a very competitive person, and I want to be contributing to the team and adding value, right? But that's where we need to start like emphasizing some of these things, or not necessarily emphasizing, but just stop placing so much value on just 2 or 3 stats. Right. And even if you're succeeding at those 2 or 3 stats, that's awesome. But you're still not like, the reason your friends want to hang out with you, the reason your parents love you isn't because of those stats, right? It's because of these other things that don't show up in the stat sheet, right? So let's work on and continue to develop some of those as well.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to what we're talking about with sports parents. We see it all of the time that the parents do put a lot of emphasis on those stats, and they do have their place. However, to Dave's point, if a guy goes up there and he smokes the ball 4 times and he happens to hit it right at someone, I'm looking at it like he had a great game. A parent doesn't necessarily understand that, and they're like, oh, you went 0 for 4 today. There goes your average. And it means nothing.
I want to ask you, from your experience, that athlete goes 0 for 4, but smoked them. When he's walking back to the dugout, tell me about his mood, his demeanor. Like, I mean, that you typically see. Are they like, do they recognize the positive of that? Or are they like pretty down about it?
Depends on the player.
Yeah, ain't that the truth, right? And probably depends on the parent of that player.
Yeah. Sometimes it's the competitive drive. I can just recall real quick the player that I had, not this past year, but the year before, hit a ground ball between first and second. It was a base hit, but it barely made it out of the infield. It was just one of those things, but a run scored on it. He got to first, and he's all like head down, moping, because he's so super competitive that even though the end result was perfectly fine or even, a huge positive, we got a run, he's safe on first, he was just like, I barely hit the ball. And it's like, okay, that, that's that drive. And then there's other people that, and we used to, listen, it's one of those things where at some point I had to change my message to the players, because when the kids were very young, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, they would hit, a weak hit and be like, hey, it's a line drive in the book. It means the same thing as everything else. Well, no, it doesn't. Like, there is a time where, there's a time where we have to give them some reality that, the high school coach is not going to be caring about the little rollover ground ball you hit. So, we see the whole wide range of things with that. Right.
One of the things I feel like as they get older, as youth athletes get older, the things that start changing that coaches start talking about, which I love, is that we start talking about decision making. Right. And we don't actually care about the result either way. Right. Something good happened, something bad happened. But like, tell me about the decision to do this. Right. And if their decision making was good, we're like almost we'll live with the result either way. Right. And I kind of love that. And I feel like that's where the message starts flipping from like youth sports as you get closer to high school, right, is learning more and more about like the decision making that goes into it. And I also think that's something that like sifts a lot of athletes out, that they had a lot of success maybe in those younger ages, and it's simply because maybe they were more athletic, right? They were more athletic, they were stronger, they were taller, they were older, they were faster, whatever it was, right? And then once we start getting to that point where like decisions really matter, well, now we're starting to see this same like really, really big, strong, athletic kid make some poor decisions, right? Oh, so maybe like that is, something we need to work on. Maybe that's like a limiting trait or characteristic. And whereas we start seeing that from some of these other kids that maybe kind of surprise us a little bit, is just how good of decision makers they are.
All right. Well, time flies when you're having fun, and we certainly enjoyed this conversation, Jon. I wish we had a little bit more time with it, but we know you got a hard out here. So why don't you go ahead and give our listeners your contact info? How can they reach out and see what your company's all about?
Awesome. Yeah. Find me at www.rjpg.net, rjpg.net. And then reach me on Instagram or Twitter. Handle's the same. It's at JOZZY JOZZY Psych, and sharing a bunch of good content. Would love any questions or thoughts or feedback. But guys, this has been a really fun conversation. You guys are doing a bang up job out here, doing really, really good stuff. I'm sorry I got to leave, and maybe we do part 2 soon.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, because I think that we've scratched the surface, and I think there's a lot of stuff we could talk about that'll benefit our listeners greatly. So, Jon, I want to thank you so much for reaching out and for spending some time with us.
Yeah, you bet, guys. You have a great one.
You too.
Thanks, Jon. Well, there you have it. Kind of a quick hit on Jon Osborn from RJ Performance Group, rjpg.net. What'd you think, Jimmy?
Loved it. The thing that I liked the most was that he has this, we'll call it a cheat sheet, right? For parents, for sport parents to kind of maybe check themselves at times. I really enjoy talking about the items that are in this checklist, I guess I would call it. I really don't know what else to call it.
Yeah, just, a series of do's and don'ts, something that I'm glad we were able to get into a handful of them, type of thing that, unfortunately, due to his time constraints, we didn't have him for the normal type of time we would have somebody. So certainly seems like an opportunity to have a good guest back again, and we can go through probably the rest of these and some of the other things that his organization does. But, yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah, we discussed a few of the items, and, most of them, look, let's face it, a lot of the things are stuff that we've talked about a million times and stuff that a lot of people talk about. But I like the idea that he has this little graphic that kind of puts it out there. So, a parent can take a look at this real quick, and it gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 12 items where it'll give you the headline, and then it'll give you a little brief explanation of what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and I can't say that there's anything on here that that I disagree with. A lot of it, once you explain what it is, things like validating emotions, right? So obviously there's plenty of emotions that shouldn't be validated. The coach hates me, I suck, those types of things we have to get rid of. But you want to make sure that you are giving them the positive reinforcement that they need. And, again, we can't just put the kids on a pedestal. We do have to be able to hold them accountable. And when they don't do great, it's okay to let them know that. But it's one of those things, the whole, turn the car ride into a coffin. Don't do it 5 seconds after the game is over. Let's let them hopefully enjoy some of the moment. And then when it comes time to the next practice, which that night, the next day, what have you, that's when we can address those types of things.
Sure. I also, the one thing that I really loved that he talked about was, after a game, pick up the phone. If you want to gripe or complain, pick up the phone, call somebody else. Do it away from your young athletes so they don't hear you. And you could kind of vent to that person rather than venting to your player, which, only brings them down. Praise them. And again, on the other hand, if they had a really good game, again, pick up the phone, call grandma, call a friend. Let the player hear you say to somebody else how proud you are of them, how much they, how well they did that day. To me, that was very powerful.
Yeah, like I said, these aren't, changing the world like, oh my God, I never thought of this type of thing, but it is nice to get it in a nice kind of concise package, and it all makes sense. And if there's anything that you disagree with here, then you probably need to do some self-reflecting and say, it's one of those things where when somebody else is always the problem, that's probably not what's going on. Problem is probably a little closer to home there.
Yeah. And I think that what I'm probably going to do is when we post this episode, I'm going to put an attachment on that shows this little cheat sheet that he came up with that I love. And this way the parents and the coaches out there can download this. And it's a good tool. It's a really good tool.
Yeah, it definitely is. And keep in mind, it is just one tool in their toolbox. So again, RJPG, the letters rjpg.net. You go out there. They are available. Jon is available for live sessions. You can sign up for it, whether that be as an individual or they do team stuff as well. So, and not just from a baseball standpoint, but all aspects of sports and really all aspects of life. They've got what looks to be a really, really nice program. Full disclosure, obviously, we haven't explored that any further, but just the initial feelings that both of us got from speaking with Jon is that they do things the right way there. It's not just they're not just going to try to sell you on some additional services and, you got to sign up for a 12 package deal and things like that. So if this is something that you're interested in, and you should be, for your player, for your team, definitely encourage you to head out there, check them out. And, it is a specialized thing. It's as much as we certainly love the whole buying local, shopping local type of thing. This isn't the type of thing you can find just everywhere, right? These are, and I know, you've done a ton of research into the mental performance side. This isn't the type of thing you can just call up and have somebody come out and talk to your team. This is a very specialized, kind of a unique niche skills and abilities. It is the type of thing you need to schedule some regularly scheduled time to go through the mental side of things. It certainly can only make you a better person, a better athlete, better coach, better parent, and it'll show to the kids whether or not you are willing to give 100% effort and whether you are going to be able to maintain your positive mental attitude, because those are things that will make you very successful in all aspects of life. Final thoughts, Coach?
Yeah, and it's also something that, as a coach, you have to make this part of your routine, make this part of your practice programs. This is, again, it's just like any other part of the game. It needs to be drilled. It needs to be explained. And believe me, if you do these type of things as a parent, as a coach, you will be a lot more successful. So in the end, the long and short of it really comes down to people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you on the next one.